The world is changing, and it is changing fast. In a world interconnected, we need business resilience and business continuity. Having this in mind, I have the distinct pleasure today to have with us Mr. Matthew Finn, the CEO of augmentiq. My name is Dr. Marios Eftimiopoulos, and I'm the CEO of Strategy International. And this is Prime Analysis. Mr. Finn, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us. I know you're a busy man and you're traveling around the world. So you're a consultant, you're with augmentiq, you're the CEO of a company that does business around the world. Tell us a few things about augmentiq.
Well, we work exclusively in the security domain. So we help both government and industry create capabilities in what we call border security and transportation security. Essentially, our purpose is to solve problems and help make the world a safer place to travel. So the two lines of business very much focused on the government side of security. So anything that's regulated, such as a border crossing, particularly for international travel, and also for aviation security or transportation security. All of those are heavily regulated environments. Around the world, you'll see different elements of privatization and liberalization. In some countries, it could be the police that conduct those functions at the security checkpoint, and in others, it will be private companies. So we work across those two spectrums, border security and transportation security.
Considering this, and the reason why I've asked you is because I would like to talk a bit, if you want, about the security landscape that is coming all around. So far, we are well aware of international affairs, security affairs, and so on and so forth. But we lack sometimes to discuss about human security, and border security, transport security, something that we utilize ourselves as clients of an airline company, of an airport, of a train, and goes on and on. Recently, we've seen a lot of accidents with trains in Europe, in Greece, and people is wondering what sort of security can it be achieved, because we are so much concentrated on international affairs, but these also impact business and trade. So what is the global state of affairs with regards to transportation security, let's say, or homeland security, for that matter?
Well, transportation security in particular has been completely overhauled since 9/11. That was really a milestone in the security calendar of the last 25 years. 9/11 changed the way we looked at security. Prior to that, it was very much around the detection of improvised explosive devices, improvised incendiary devices, weapons, guns, and knives, etc. Predominantly prior to 9/11, the main concern from a transportation standpoint was around hijacking and sabotage. Never before had we seen anything on the scale of 9/11 which used the civil aviation infrastructure as a weapon itself. Yeah. And I think we can all remember with some kind of profound impact the consequences of that day. Tremendous loss of life, and because it happened in the US, it actually had a global impact. And I say because it happened in the US, and I make the point because change in transportation security is often driven by events that happen in the US. Mm-hmm. Sadly, all too often we've seen other events happen in other countries and other geographies around the world, but they don't engender the same kind of change or transformation as a consequence.
But I think these sort of things have now a totally different approach, because this is directly related with the business mentality and the fact that we need to be interconnected in all transport methodologies, and at the same time provide the security and the resilience to go from point A to point B safely. But at the same time, as you said, the point of change of 9/11 actually changed the way that we anticipate security in its totality, because Homeland Security was the creation of such a result. The 9/11 Commission of the United States speculated and saw and investigated, and the outcomes were that there were a lot of flaws, at least to the US system, which had, in fact, as you said, an impact to other countries and the related industries in other countries. The question being today is that people would like to reach safely from one point to another. But safety matters in all ways, in all methods, from the point you go to the terminal, the way that you exit, what do you take, the train or the airplane or even your car, to go from utilizing infrastructure and basic infrastructure. So where do we stand in this standpoint of political concern, because infrastructure and infrastructural design, which includes also security, infrastructural security, matters. How do countries anticipate? It is not a directly linked national security element, but it is part of homeland security. So how do these countries anticipate today, so many years after 9/11, considering also the fact that we need to do business fast, we need to be resilient, secure, and more so safe?
I think the question itself is inherently complex, and in fact just the way you ask the question actually reveals the answer. The reason it's complex is because the way governments approach security today is often quite fragmented. Mm-hmm. So the Department of Homeland Security in the US is kind of an all-encompassing body that has both Customs and Border Protection and the Transportation Security Administration within it. That's quite a unique government body worldwide. For the most part, Transportation Security will be under the Department of Transport, and Border Security will be under the Ministry of Interior. And then you start to look at trade and goods and customs, and that's invariably under Ministry of Finance or a dedicated customs function. Exactly. So specifically to your point, there are so many different layers of security within transportation. You can look at the airport as critical infrastructure, and most governments do. They'll see all ports, major train stations and airports as critical national infrastructure, and that will require a certain type of response to it, both from a regulatory standpoint, from an operational standpoint, and in terms of the security that's delivered there. But within an airport, you have multiple types of security, ranging from the security that we all know and love, the aviation security screening checkpoint, where you do the cabin baggage and the walk-through metal detector. That needs to evolve significantly because it's just not good enough in its current form. Then you've got perimeter security to make sure that the actual campus of the airport is safe and secure and there's no unauthorized access. Then you'll have the ultra-sensitive restricted zones, such as where the aircraft are or where the fuel dump is within the fuel depot is within the airport environment. And then you'll have behavior detection. You may have police that are doing roving patrols, visible patrols.
And drone patrols.
Drones as well are now starting to come in. Yeah. And obviously within an airport environment, you've got to be very careful about the deployment of drones because you've got aircraft and turbines and engines, etc., that are all moving around.
Actually, in Europe, it's a bit different because now added to this, you also have illegal migration. And because of illegal migration, you also have European competence operations being in the airports.
You do, and illegal immigration or irregular immigration, I mean, there's some nuance and important nuance in those two terms. Europe has historically suffered from an irregular migration problem. What we saw in 2015 was when we had a mass influx coming in from the east. That was kind of a watershed moment in terms of European border security. For the most part, what Europe has struggled with is irregular migration, which is people from third countries outside the 27 member state of the European Union, coming in on legitimate travel documents and having a legitimate right to stay, whether they needed a visa or not. That's a second level of consideration. But then they don't leave. And because there was no exit control that was systematically deployed around Europe, it became very difficult to know if Matthew had left or if he was still in the country or if he'd moved from one Schengen state to another, between which there are no border controls because it's the free movement of people.
Right.
So the European Commission has quite rightly moved forward with something called the European Entry-Exit System. That was actually due to come into force earlier this year. In fact, it was due to come into force last year. All 27 member states will require all third country nationals to provide their fingerprints, a high resolution facial photo from their travel document to answer a series of Schengen questions, and their passport, instead of being manually stamped, will now be digitally entered into the European entry-exit system.
But this accounts for non-EU members, I presume, right?
Non-EU, correct.
Because the EU, we still have the freedom of movement.
Correct. With
a passport and identification. The question is, and I'm going to challenge you a bit. You mentioned this in the beginning. I'm going to try to title it, capabilities. Are we synchronized in those capabilities within the EU and outside the EU?
Short answer, no. No, and there are significant variations in capability. Even across the EU, you can look at some member states that have got a higher degree of organisational maturity, higher degree of capability. better understanding of technology, better understanding of how to use data. So if we talk specifically about data, which is quite an interesting aspect of risk assessment within the security domain, about 15 years ago, around 2006, I believe, the European Commission introduced a directive for the collection of advanced passenger information,
Right.
essentially the same data that's in the machine-readable zone of your passport. When that's provided, it becomes quite easy to see if you are or if you are not on the warnings index of that country.
Yeah.
So the airline will transmit the data, the government receives it, runs it against their warnings index or their watch list or the Schengen information system, and then can determine if you are or if you are not someone of interest that may need further questioning and examination. The reality is, even within the 27 EU member states, that capability is varied. Some states are very good at it, other states are struggling with it, and they receive the data and they don't do a great deal with it. And then at the further end of the spectrum, you've got more advanced thinking in terms of intelligence and targeting. So they're actually looking at that data and the booking information and other information that they can associate with you as an individual or your type of travel behavior, and they can determine based on their own operational risk assessment whether or not you fit within a profile that could be of a slightly higher risk and therefore subject to a greater level of scrutiny. And again, even just within Europe, you've got some countries that are very good at that. They've got advanced thinking, advanced tools and systems, and others that are just collecting data and not really doing much with it.
Can I say the following? I would like to a bit concentrate on something that is quite interesting. So I would like to go in a further discussion, maybe a bit more interesting, to find out a few more details, legal, and I will explain what I mean. There's one country that I prefer not to mention at this point, that when you want to fly from the European Union to that country, you share information. And that's fine. The question is that, because there's a lot of discussion about this inside the European Parliament, as I remember, which reflects GDPR. The European Union was mentioned multiple times that does not want to share enough information because they consider that it's more than enough, the information that you share about the EU citizen. Where do we stand with regard to this element? Because I know that there was a deadline for both sides, and at some point there was an agreement. What was this agreement about?
So you're absolutely right. GDPR is the kind of the highest level of data protection that exists worldwide. No other country anywhere in the world has got that level of data privacy control and data protection regimes in place. So there are many countries that will require you to provide information prior to travel. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the United States being a couple of really good examples. Typically, this type of information was provided previously in a traditional visa process. Those traditional visa processes have become more digitized now, and it's more like the electronic system of travel authorization in the US, or a very similar acronym in Australia, Electronic Travel Authorization System. ETAS has been in place in Australia since about 1997. It's not a new system, it's been there a long time. When it comes to GDPR, it's not really the visa aspects that are the visa data that is the issue, nor is it the advanced passenger information, because that data you would typically provide as part of a traditional travel process regardless. Even if there was a completely manual process, you would still be presenting your passport at the embassy to get a visa.
Right.
You'd still be presenting your passport at border control in order to be granted leave to enter that country. Where the issue comes around predominantly is around the passenger name record data, which is synonymous with booking information.
Right.
And so I spoke earlier about the European Commission or the European Union introducing the Advanced Passenger Information Directive. They also introduced one about passenger name record data. That's where the GDPR sensitivities lie, because in PNR information, if it's provided to a third country government without any filters in place, it could quite easily reveal political, medical, or religious information about you as an individual. And those three types of information are deemed ultra sensitive from a privacy standpoint. If you selected a particular type of meal on board an aircraft, that could reveal your religion, and that that would be contained in the PNR.
But you still have the opportunity to give this meal, as an example, the meal request to X airline, but I'd like to be fed with this one. So, okay, this is not providing the GDPR, according to GDPR, should not be provided, but then you provided you indirectly to the company, which you know that it's a non-EU company, therefore it can give the information in another way.
Correct. And so there's quite a few bilateral agreements. So the EU and Canada, EU and Australia, they've got these types of agreements in place where there's a large travel market between the European Union and those countries. There are rules and procedures in place about which information is shared. But you're absolutely right to point out that if you're traveling on a US carrier, for example, and you request a certain type of meal, which may be indicative of your faith, that information could find its way to the US government as part of their reception of passenger name record data.
So all this basically was ignited by the fact that we need to be more secure and more resilient to security?
It was. So passenger name record data is really good about detecting the anomalous behavior.
Yeah.
Advanced passenger information is really good. If I know I'm looking for you, or if they're looking for me, they know Matthew Finn, Irish national, born on the 4th of July. As soon as they receive my advanced passenger information, they'll know that that's me.
Right.
And they can raise a flag and they can intervene accordingly. Or they can deny me boarding
Entrance,
of that aircraft.
Entrance to the,
And so Australia, for example...
A lot of companies do that on checking.
Yeah, and it's quite clever. So, I mean, Australia, since the Olympics in 2000, when the check-in agent previously swiped your passport, it would immediately be sent to Canberra. And in sub-second time, Canberra would respond saying yes or no, authorization to board or denial of boarding.
And they made it more complicated, I think, also during COVID.
COVID added another layer of complexity because we needed digital passenger declarations, proof of recovered status or proof of vaccination status. COVID is actually quite an interesting example of a really positive collaboration between government and industry. Because
Australia was closed for many.
Australia was
months.
closed for a long time, as was New Zealand, as were several countries that literally closed their border, kind of based on a zero COVID policy that was in place. But for other countries where they started to open up and they required these passenger declarations or passenger locator forms, as some countries called them, it required information about your vaccine status or your recovered status
These were not GDPR?
No, because the European Union as well moved quite quickly to
based on WHO's regulations.
Exactly, on working with WHO, working with the International Civil Aviation Organization, working with the International Air Transport Association. They put in place a framework and they allowed a use of a new technology called the Visible Digital Seal, VDS, which is an ICAO standard, and that allowed for interoperability among the 193 member states of ICAO. So each country could then review and verify that the information they were being provided about COVID status, vaccination status, etc., was correct and verifiable.
Right. Quite interesting. So, post-COVID, we're now seeing new system. Some of them know it as the ARI system, where you just put your passport, it goes to the system, and goes on and on and on. In non-EU countries, now they're implementing a new technology. I'm leading the discussion to the use of technology with regards to homeland and infrastructure. It's very interesting as a technology now, because one of the most important things, and I still believe that for all security experts, it is very important. How do you minimize time? On the one hand, you cannot avoid being security checked, and somehow it's good for you, in the sense that it's a protective measure. On the other hand, it takes you hours and hours to just be there, waiting time. You know, you see it in non-EU, meaning international flights come 3 hours earlier. So it's not exactly a flight time of 5 hours. It's 5 hours plus 3 hours plus 1 hour minimum commuting, and goes on and on. So one of the main challenges is how to minimize time. And this is the part where technology comes along. And apparently so, a lot of airports are now building technology that will allow people to just check in online and just walk through the immigration through a system that you don't have to check anything. They just see your face and just continue walking, and you go to your main gate. What's your feeling about this? Where are we located with regard to technological capabilities and how safe this is?
Safety-wise, these technologies are really reliable. They've been around a long time.
Yes.
I'm a very strong advocate, and a lot of the work that augmentiq does is in that space. It's about the simplification and the acceleration of those transaction times when it comes to travel. You should not need to arrive in an airport 3 hours prior to the departure of the aircraft. You should not need to stand in line at an immigration control booth for 2 hours in order to snake your way through just to have your passport manually verified by an officer of the state. These things are very much part of the legacy thinking. And before I come back to the specific answer around technology, just want to take a step back, because what's needed is a rethink. And I think if there's a singular challenge to both border security and transportation security, it's the weight of legacy thinking that we're still constrained by today. If we had to invent a border control process today, we would not invent the one that we currently have. If we had to invent
by knowing the outcomes,
because we know what the outcome needs to be. From a border security standpoint, I need to know that Marios is Marios and that this is a genuine travel document, and you've got the authority or the eligibility to travel to or through or from my country. I can do that by many other means other than having you stand in line and present me with a standard travel document that I then read and verify and check your credentials against a national database. So in terms of technology, there's one technology which will actually weave its way through the question you posed. And it's a really interesting technology called the Digital Travel Credential, or DTC. And the DTC is the latest iteration of the ICAO standard. That's the International Civil Aviation Organization. That's the UN agency responsible for standardizing passports, known as machine-readable travel documents. Actually known
biometric in nature.
Biometric in nature. That's the electronic machine-readable travel document, or EMRTD. A passport to anyone else. And the data that is stored on the chip of your biometric passport contains a high-resolution photo of you, the same that appears on the page in the visible zone of your passport. It includes all of the information that's there: name, date of birth, issuing state, expiration date, etc., etc. And it also includes, quite helpfully or quite essentially, the cryptographic signature from the issuing state. So if you have a Cypriot passport, or in my case an Irish passport, the cryptographic signature will determine that, yes, this is a genuine travel document issued by the government of Ireland on this date, and it hasn't been tampered with, and we're therefore very confident in saying that this is Matthew Finn and he holds this passport.
So the purpose of the digital signature of the country is for forging documents.
Correct.
For people that have done. I presume that the forge of documentation has been there for a long time, considering the fact that a lot of people traveled with fake documents, especially those that were trying to illegally come inside either the EU or the US, or mainly countries which are very developed financially and politically and sociologically. Basically, the target countries that these people were aiming to go for. So where are we at this point with regards to this kind of documentation?
So really interestingly, fake and forged documents are on the decline. So we're seeing a significant decline in people presenting at borders or at security checkpoints with fake or forged travel documents. What we are seeing now in its place is the rise of identity fraud.
Right.
And this is now a major concern, because if you have a breeder document, such as a driver's license or something else, like a birth certificate or marriage certificate, using something that has less integrity in its issuance process, and many countries don't issue reliable birth certificates, and it's quite easy to obtain a fake birth certificate. You can then use that fake birth certificate to create a new identity.
Which is legal by nature because you already have that.
Exactly. And then you're issued with a genuine travel document that won't alert anyone to the fact that it's a fake or a forgery, because it isn't. And so these are known as fraudulently obtained genuine travel documents, or FOG documents. This is now a major concern, because we've seen the decline in document fraud, but the consequent rise in identity fraud, which is a lot harder to detect. And just quickly on document fraud, Interpol actually has a really good capability in this area. They have a database called the Mind Find system, which is accessible to pretty much every airline worldwide. And by swiping the passport, not only can you provide the advanced passenger information to the receiving country or the transit country, you can also then ping the Interpol lost and stolen travel document database, and it will flag whether or not that travel document has been reported lost or stolen.
Right.
Very interestingly, Malaysia 370, the aircraft that is a mystery to many aviation security professionals around the world. When that aircraft disappeared, there was a brief story that emerged about two people traveling on board. I believe they were Iranian nationals who were traveling on, I think it was a stolen German and a stolen Italian passport. A lot of the thought was that potentially they were the actors involved in the destruction of that aircraft. It turns out that they are actually just trying to travel to Europe via quite a circuitous route and become illegal migrants as a result. But I thought it was interesting that there wasn't more attention put on that particular aspect of it, because that was detectable. Those travel documents were seen by a border officer in Malaysia because there's an exit control in place. They were also seen by the airline because the airline has to perform a check on the quality of the document before you board. And also those documents were already known to Interpol as being lost or stolen. So there were quite a few opportunities to detect those documents being used by people that they didn't belong to. So there is capability out there, but the real message is identity fraud is on the rise and document fraud is on the decline.
Interesting. Now I'm going to make it a bit more complicated. And this is very much so to do with the fact that in the European Union, at least, we're trying to digitize the identity. The identity will go in an application, it's already there, at least from the known countries we have an acquaintance with people and so on. Some countries have already the identification, at least in the national level, on an application, which it's deemed as secure. You don't get to travel just yet. Actually, there was an innovation being done by the Greek state with regards to the identity and the driving license being put on an application that you can use it inside the country, not outside. But then again, it was a proposal to the European Union to integrate the system, and it seems that the European Union has picked up on this to see and examine the value added. But then again, you tell me that identity is on the rise, identity fraud is on the rise. How do you, is it maybe a system that will eventually, if we have to upload this on a more technology, therefore, what is my ideology? Instead of fighting it, you apply more technology, which by definition secures and sees eventually, because whoever wants to use it, and if it becomes a compulsory element eventually to utilize digital formats and forms of identification, this means that somehow this application is secure, has cross-checked, and so on and so forth. Are we there yet? Are we there to the digital utility of this identification, which the application itself or the system or the software protects because of GDPR, and at the same time protects the legality of this document?
We are incredibly close to that reality, and that speaks to my earlier point about the digital travel credential. Right. So the digital travel credential, there is a set of guiding principles by ICAO already. There is an international standards organization task force that's mandated with creating the technical standard, and they are very close to finalizing it. Now, in Europe, you're absolutely right. They've been putting a lot of emphasis on around digital identity. There's an initiative or a set of regulations, in fact, called EIDAS, the electronic identity. I can't quite remember the rest of the acronym, but EIDAS has been around for some time. There has also been talk about the digital wallet within which all of these...
this is the digital wallet we're talking
exactly,
about.
Yeah. And those two go hand in hand from a technical and a regulatory standpoint.
Right.
So when I speak about the ICAO digital travel credential, and you ask about technology, there are two answers to that. One is that the technology is there. You can do it today.
Right.
So you talked earlier about being able to just arrive at check-in, facial recognition determines that you are eligible to check in for this flight. Mm-hmm. You then board the aircraft, and again, facial recognition determines that you're the same person that checked in 30 minutes ago, and you're now authorized to go onto the jetway and onto the aircraft. And you can do the same again upon arrival at the border. That technology exists. And when governments have got a reliable standard against which they can issue a digital travel credential, they no longer need to issue you with a physical travel document.
Right.
The same data that they write to the chip on the passport, they can just write to your mobile phone or write to a secure government website. You download it into your digital wallet, and then you can use that again and again, whether it's for check-in, for boarding, for crossing borders, applying for a visa, checking into a hotel room. So instead of having to stand in line at the reception counter, you can just tap your phone on the door.
Like you're tapping right now your credit card in order to pay.
Absolutely. And it uses that same type of capability with near-field communication. The other answer to your question is that a lot of it is about process integrity. Mm-hmm. And before we start issuing hundreds of thousands or hundreds of millions of digital identities, we need to be really sure that the issuance process, there's integrity in it. And as I spoke earlier about having unreliable breeder documents against which you create an identity, you would need to have a very reliable process that says this is definitely Matthew, this is definitely who he claims to be, and we're now absolutely confident that we can issue him with a digital travel credential into his digital wallet if we so choose as a European, and then he can use that for many other things, including getting his driving license issued and having that as a separate record within the digital wallet, having things like a digital passenger declaration for health requirements, and then other things like proof of age if I wanted to buy alcohol.
Some countries are implementing everything in one identity, and this is quite interesting. They put everything in one identity: your health system, your health insurance scheme, your driving license, your identity, and everything. In fact, in the United States, for example, non-EU member, driving license stands for a state identification.
State-issued photo ID.
Yeah, because in the United States, they want a photo ID.
Yeah.
So the photo ID has that. So the next step is to put this into one. The question is, I mean, I'm sticking to the European part, but then I'll divert this to non-EU members because I want to see how much the standards are in communication with them. But are all European countries in conformity right now? Because a lot of people don't want to change, for example, their old identity. I know a couple of them. They don't want to change their old driving license.
Yeah.
And there are always two excuses. Excuse number one, they will ask us 3 times to change it, 4 times to change it. So let's do it once everything is ready. And the other one is, I don't feel secure. We're implementing too much technology. Now there's the government that says, well, I have to be in conformity with the European Union. And the European Union sometimes does not put everything as a must. It can be an advisory towards the national government. So are all European states right now in conformity? Are they having the same system? Are they having this compatibility between them? Where do we stand on this?
I think from an EU standpoint, the short answer is yes. There's a lot of harmonisation around those types of capabilities. Some governments are further ahead. Estonia is a really good example,
especially after the cyber attacks. It was already in the forefront, but they changed more, right?
Yeah, it was already a very advanced digital nation. They had gone a long way forward, and as a fairly small country in terms of population size,
that was their weak point. I'm sorry, I'm stopping, but this was also their weak point.
It was, a vulnerability of sorts because there was so much data that was available digitally, and therefore it becomes a target in and of itself. If you know that there's an incredible, valuable asset over here that's part of national infrastructure and national services, then that you basically paint a target on it and say, hack this, and you can disrupt the economy, societies, and create major problems for the citizens of that country. So yes, there is a fair degree, a high degree, I would say, of harmonisation across the EU. To the other points you were making, it comes down to interoperability and compatibility.
Okay.
So if one country issues a digital driver's license in format A and another country issues the same digital driver's license in format B, it becomes very difficult for you to then hire a car or drive a car in the other country because they can't verify whether or not you've got a proper driving license.
Accepted.
They should be accepted to the degree where there is a standard that allows them to be transferable. There can still be national variations, but there needs to be an underlying either European, pan-European, or preferably a global standard. So organisations such as the International Organisation for Standardisation does have an international standard for the credit card format driver's licence, the data elements that should be within it, and how you would capture and store and cryptographically sign biometrics, for example.
Plus the GDPR laws, plus the European assessments, because I know that the United States does different assessments about it. Other Gulf countries do different assessments. Maybe Hong Kong does have different assessments. Maybe Australia has different assessments. So the standards within the EU are getting together.
Yes.
Okay. So that leads me to the external one. How do externals who would like to trade, business, and operate with EU see this?
There will always be a process of negotiation between the European Commission, the Parliament, the Council, and that third country.
Right.
And whether that's for trade in terms of goods and customs, or whether that's for immigration or tourism, or whether that's about the transmission and exchange of data, those third countries will need to enter into agreement with the European Commission in order to maintain and update and enhance their existing agreements. So today, for example, Australians coming to Europe benefit from a particular type of what we call facilitation. Do they or do they not need a visa? Are they allowed to stay for 90 days? That's harmonised across the EU, and invariably there's some form of reciprocity with the other third country. So any changes to things like GDPR or entry-exit requirements are usually then renegotiated in these third country agreements.
Can I say another thing? First entrance point in the EU. Let's take the case of Cyprus. Cyprus is surrounded by Middle Eastern countries. Directly, through the sea. And at the same time, Cyprus is a hub, especially for the Gulf states, for other countries in Central Asia, probably. I'm not going to talk inside Europe. As a first entrance country, do they have a bigger role to play? And the reason why I'm saying this is because all European countries are proposing. And all European countries constantly assess their capabilities and their abilities to expand. So what have you seen that makes things interesting from a standpoint of view of a first entrance country into the EU? For example, Ireland, your native country, can be first entrance for somebody who's in the US or in Canada. Do they understand the capabilities? Do they share the capabilities? They share information? They share information, obviously. But they also enhance collaboration, may I say this? And so how do they envision all these standards? And vice versa, by the way, for us going, for example, to the United States or going to the Arab countries.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and you're absolutely right to talk about the importance of being the first country, because that also speaks to some of the issues around asylum and refugee status, and many countries are disadvantaged in that space because of their geography. So it's very difficult to arrive directly in Sweden or directly in Norway, for example. Not that Norway's in the EU, but directly into those countries because of the nature of their geography.
Right.
So first country, those where you can come from a third country directly to a European nation, such as Cyprus, it places an additional set of responsibilities on that state in order to make sure that they've got the right checks and balances in place. Do they share data between member states? Yes, absolutely. And there are plenty of pan-European capabilities that are created and supported by an agency called EU LISA, the European Large Systems Agency, headquartered in Tallinn in Estonia, interestingly. Right. So you've got that level of pan-European capability there. When I look at Cyprus from a kind of a fresh perspective, not having lived here very long, I can see a number of things that are worthy of attention. I'll say they're worthy of attention, but what I really mean is that they need to be improved. Right. And the border process at the moment is quite robust. It's a two-stage process where most people have to first go to a kiosk and then to the border officer. There are also some issues that I've noticed around the security of the airport itself. There are some things that I've noticed in Paphos and Larnaca in particular that aren't really aligned.
The two main airports.
The two main airports, yeah, and they're not really aligned with best practice. And I think part of that is driven by the reality that Cyprus isn't necessarily a high value target for terrorism necessarily. But one incident in the island of Cyprus could fundamentally change the world's perception of safety and security within the country, and that could have a significant impact on the economy and tourism.
Actually, there was an article recently about the capabilities and standards in the airport. Not so much from the standpoint of security as to secure like you do in your company, but it was from the point of view that there is a lot of incoming tourists. So it's a tourist island. One of its main industries is tourism. So because of tourism, we have to provide security resilience. So it is very interesting to hear out how we can make it better. Implementation of laws, capabilities, in infrastructure matters. But I also think that one of the things that needs to be met with regard to safety is the fact that you have an unsolved problem, which is the Cyprus issue, which also creates other issues because you have issues that need to be discussed with regard to the safety of the whole island, not only in its air space but also all around its seas.
Agreed, and you'll appreciate there is a lot of similarity between my home country and Cyprus because of that. We have our own issues in the north, and essentially there's a land border on the island of Ireland in the same way that there's essentially a land border on the island of Cyprus.
But this is a frozen conflict in this case. I mean,
it is, and it would be unwise of me to comment on it being freshly arrived here.
There's no issue of commenting, but these are the facts that there is a checkpoint.
These are the facts and these are the realities, and they need to be looked at holistically, and that will require dialogue and collaboration with all of the parties involved. And you're right to highlight that we need to look at territorial integrity, right around the island of Cyprus, including the maritime and the airspace and the land itself. And however the problem in the north is resolved, or how the island becomes reunified and integrated, will determine a lot of those kind of steps along the way. But there needs to be collaboration regardless of what people's views are on should or should it not be.
There is a cooperation. It's called the Cyclops Center in Larnaca, which is basically a government work between collaboration between the U.S. forces on homeland security and also search and rescue missions and stuff that operates in Larnaca. And I think this is where we are led the capabilities, in increased capabilities, and I think that will play a pivotal role in the internal affairs of a solution to the Cyprus issue. How do you implement safety, security, search and rescue missions around it and in the island and more? So the question is, considering the fact that it's a major tourist hub, it is a hub of entrance towards the EU, it is a place of a frozen conflict which is yet to be finalized and negotiated, where the status and the infrastructure needs to be constantly updated. Where do you see this going in the near future? Or are we to see more Europe implementing standards in here? I mean, are we centralizing methods, and are we implementing to countries such as Ireland, such as Cyprus? Or are they going to take by themselves?
It's a really good question, and I think that focusing on the positive is the way to affect that change.
Yeah, of course.
It's very easy to focus on the negative and all the complexities of the various problems that exist. But travel and tourism, as you alluded to earlier, is a huge contributor to the economy here in Cyprus. So if we were to focus national efforts on building capability in travel and tourism, in making it a more attractive destination for people to come, and for that tourism to be sustainable and environmentally friendly, and for people to be able to arrive in greater numbers but not cause queues at the border or queues at the aviation security checkpoint. By focusing on our desire to improve the arrivals experience and the tourism experience of people coming to the island and contributing to the economy, as a function of that, we can then see how we can solve some of those problems. And so you're right to talk about, is this about the EU or is this about the nation state of Cyprus? It's a combination of both. And there's there's value in having these harmonised standards and harmonised capabilities at the EU level, but it will always be the member state's responsibility to implement it in its country. And there may be variations in that implementation. So here the border is slightly different to how it is in Germany or Ireland or France, for example. So I think if we focus on the positive aspects of why we're doing this, to improve tourism, to improve the contribution to the economy through more and better tourist arrivals in Cyprus, by looking at it through that lens, we can actually then start to create budgets, create, taxation, if that's part of the mix as well, so that we can actually create budgets for infrastructure development and for improving those services which deliver better safety, better security, and better outcomes for the Cypriot people.
Good proposal for both the government and the EU. So I know that we can spend hours and hours talking about those things, and thank you very much, Matthew, for being here today with us. I really appreciate it, and we will make sure we will have another opportunity to speak more about those things. I think they're very important because so far we've been listening about international affairs, but also critical infrastructure matters. Nationwide, European Union-wide standards actually matter. These are also elements of security which facilitate, as we said, trade and business. So thank you very much for being here today with us, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you all for watching another web series talk of Strategy International's Prime Analysis. Please subscribe, like, and follow our social media and YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Marios Eftimiopoulos, and I'm the CEO of Strategy International. And remember, impact makes a difference.